The rain poured down in sheets, turning the city streets into rivers of shimmering light. The millionaire sat in his sleek, black car, the hum of the engine barely audible over the storm. He had just left a high-profile business meeting, his mind still buzzing with numbers and strategies. But as he drove through the dimly lit streets, something caught his eye. On the sidewalk, under the flickering glow of a street lamp, a woman sat huddled against the cold. She was drenched from the rain, her clothes ragged and torn. In her arms, she cradled a tiny baby, wrapped in a thin, tattered blanket. The woman's shoulders shook as she cried, her sobs barely audible over the sound of the rain. The millionaire slowed his car, his heart tightening in his chest. He had seen homeless people before, this was a big city, after all, but something about this woman and her baby struck him deeply. Maybe it was the way she held the child so protectively, or the sheer desperation in her eyes. Without thinking, he pulled over to the side of the road. He stepped out of the car, the rain instantly soaking his expensive suit. He didn't care. He approached the woman cautiously, not wanting to startle her. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. The woman looked up at him, her eyes wide and filled with tears. She didn't speak at first, just stared at him as if he were a ghost. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Please, help us." The millionaire knelt beside her, his heart breaking at the sight of the baby's tiny face, pale and shivering. "Let me take you somewhere warm," he said. "You and your baby need help." The woman nodded weakly, her strength clearly fading. The millionaire helped her to her feet, supporting her as they walked to his car. He opened the door and carefully helped her inside, making sure the baby was secure in her arms. As he closed the door and walked around to the driver's side, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary encounter. He got back into the car and started the engine, the warmth of the heater a stark contrast to the cold outside. He glanced at the woman in the rearview mirror. She was staring straight ahead, her face pale and drawn. The baby was quiet now, its eyes closed as if asleep. "What's your name?" the millionaire asked, trying to make conversation. But the woman didn't answer. Instead, she turned to him, her eyes filled with a strange intensity. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This isn't just about me. It's about everything." Before the millionaire could respond, the woman's eyes rolled back, and she slumped forward, unconscious. The baby began to cry, a soft, pitiful sound that sent a chill down the millionaire's spine. He stepped on the gas, his mind racing. Who was this woman? Where had she come from? And what did she mean by everything? As he drove through the rain-soaked streets, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change forever. The millionaire drove as fast as he could through the rain-soaked streets, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The woman lay unconscious in the back seat, her breathing shallow and uneven. The baby, now quiet again, was nestled in her arms, its tiny face peaceful despite the chaos around it. He pulled up to the emergency entrance of the nearest hospital and rushed inside, calling for help. Within moments, a team of nurses and doctors appeared, wheeling out a stretcher. They carefully lifted the woman and the baby onto it and hurried inside, the millionaire following close behind. As they were taken into the emergency room, a nurse stopped him at the door. "Are you family?" she asked. The millionaire hesitated. "No," he said. "I found them on the street." She was crying, holding the baby. "I couldn't just leave them there." The nurse nodded, her expression softening. "We'll take care of them. You can wait here." He sat down in the waiting area, his mind racing. Who was this woman? Why was she out in the rain with a baby? And what had she meant by her cryptic words, "This isn't just about me. It's about everything"? Hours passed, the clock on the wall ticking slowly. The millionaire couldn't sit still. He paced the room, his thoughts a whirlwind of questions and worries. Finally, a doctor approached him, her face serious but calm. "The woman is stable," she said. "But she's still unconscious. We've run some tests, but there's something unusual about her condition." "Unusual?" the millionaire asked, his curiosity piqued. The doctor nodded. "Her vitals are normal, but there are anomalies. Her blood work shows traces of substances we can't identify. And her brain activity is unlike anything we've seen before. It's as if she's in some kind of deep, altered state." The millionaire frowned. "What about the baby?" "The baby is perfectly healthy," the doctor said. "No issues at all. But there's something strange about the blanket it was wrapped in." She handed him a small, folded piece of fabric. It was the blanket the woman had been holding, now clean and dry. The millionaire unfolded it and saw a strange symbol embroidered in one corner, a circle with intricate patterns inside, unlike anything he had ever seen. "Do you recognize it?" the doctor asked. He shook his head. "No. But I'll find out what it means." As the doctor walked away, the millionaire stared at the symbol, his mind racing. There was something about it that felt important. He pulled out his phone and took a picture of it, then began searching online for anything that might match. Hours turned into the early morning, and still, he found nothing. Frustrated but determined, he decided to call an old friend, a professor who specialized in ancient symbols and languages. He sent the picture and waited for a response. While he waited, he returned to the woman's room. She lay still in the bed, her face pale but peaceful. The baby was in a crib beside her, sleeping soundly. The millionaire sat down in a chair nearby, watching them. "Who are you?" he whispered, more to himself than to her. "And what are you trying to tell me?" Just then, his phone buzzed. It was a message from the professor. The millionaire opened it, his heart pounding. "This symbol," the message read, "isn't ancient. It's modern, but not publicly known. It's linked to a secret project called Project Horizon. I can't say more over text. Call me." The millionaire's hands trembled as he dialed the number. Project Horizon? What was that? And how was it connected to this woman and her baby? As the phone rang, he glanced back at the woman. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, and she looked directly at him. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear. Then her eyes closed again, and she was still. The millionaire felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than he had imagined. And he was now a part of it, whether he wanted to be or not. The millionaire stepped out of the hospital room, his mind racing. The woman's brief moment of consciousness had left him with more questions than answers. What had she been trying to say? And what was Project Horizon? He dialed the professor's number, his hands trembling slightly as he held the phone to his ear. The professor answered on the second ring. "I've been expecting your call," he said, his voice low and serious. "Where did you find this symbol?" "It's a long story," the millionaire replied. "But it's connected to a woman and a baby I found on the street. She's in the hospital now, and she mentioned something about everything. What do you know about Project Horizon?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. Project Horizon was a top-secret government initiative, the professor said finally. It was shut down years ago, but rumors about it have persisted. The project was said to involve experiments on human consciousness and time travel. "Time travel," the millionaire repeated, his voice rising in disbelief. "That's impossible." "Is it?" the professor countered. "Think about it. The symbol you sent me, it's not just a random design. It's a marker, a signature of sorts. It was used by the scientists involved in the project to identify their work. If this woman has it, she's connected to them somehow." The millionaire's mind spun. Time travel? Secret government projects? It sounded like something out of a science fiction movie. But the woman's strange condition, the symbol, and her cryptic words all pointed to something far beyond ordinary. "Do you know anyone who worked on the project?" he asked. "I might," the professor said hesitantly. "But if I give you this information, you need to be careful. This isn't just some academic curiosity. People involved in Project Horizon disappeared under mysterious circumstances. If you dig too deep, you could be putting yourself in danger." "I understand," the millionaire said. "But I can't just walk away. This woman and her baby, they need help. And I think they're connected to something much bigger." The professor sighed. "There's a man, a former scientist named Dr. Ellis. He was one of the lead researchers on Project Horizon. After the project was shut down, he went into hiding. But I might know where to find him." "Where?" the millionaire asked eagerly. "There's a small town about 3 hours from the city," the professor said. "He lives under a different name, but I can give you the address. Just be careful. And don't mention my name." The millionaire thanked the professor and hung up, his heart pounding. He glanced back at the hospital room, where the woman and baby lay. He couldn't leave them, but he also couldn't ignore the lead he'd just been given. He needed answers, and Dr. Ellis might be the only one who could provide them. He called his assistant and arranged for a private nurse to watch over the woman and baby while he was gone. Then he grabbed his coat and headed for the parking lot. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still heavy with clouds, casting a gray pall over the city. As he drove out of the city and into the countryside, his mind replayed the events of the past day. The woman's tears, the baby's quiet innocence, the strange symbol, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle he was only beginning to understand. And now, with the possibility of time travel and secret experiments, the stakes felt higher than ever. 3 hours later, he arrived at the small town the professor had described. It was a quiet, unassuming place, with a single main street and rows of modest houses. He found the address and pulled up to a small, weathered home at the end of a dirt road. He knocked on the door, his heart racing. After a moment, it creaked open, revealing an elderly man with thinning hair and glasses. He looked at the millionaire with wary eyes. "Can I help you?" the man asked. "Are you Dr. Ellis?" the millionaire asked. The man's expression tightened. "Who's asking?" "My name isn't important," the millionaire said. "But I need your help. I found a woman and a baby with a symbol, a circle with intricate patterns. I was told you might know what it means." Dr. Ellis's face paled. He glanced over his shoulder, as if checking to see if anyone was listening, then stepped aside. "You'd better come in." The millionaire followed him inside, the air thick with tension. Dr. Ellis led him to a small study, cluttered with books and papers. He sat down heavily in a chair and gestured for the millionaire to do the same. "That symbol," Dr. Ellis said, his voice trembling, "is from Project Horizon. But the project was shut down years ago. How did you find it?" The millionaire explained everything, the woman on the street, the baby, the hospital, and the professor's information. Dr. Ellis listened in silence, his face growing more and more grave. When the millionaire finished, Dr. Ellis leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. "If what you're saying is true," he said slowly, "then the woman and the baby, they're not from here. They're from the future." The millionaire stared at Dr. Ellis, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. "From the future," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's impossible." Dr. Ellis shook his head, his expression grim. "Not impossible. Just highly classified. Project Horizon was designed to explore the boundaries of human consciousness and the fabric of time itself. We made breakthroughs that were deemed too dangerous to be made public. The project was shut down, and all records were destroyed. But it seems someone, or something, has found a way to continue the work." The millionaire leaned forward, his heart pounding. What does this have to do with the woman and the baby? Dr. Ellis hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. The symbol you found, it's a marker used by the project to identify test subjects. If the woman and baby have it, they were part of an experiment. And if they're from the future, it means the experiment succeeded, but at a terrible cost. What kind of cost? The millionaire asked, his voice tense. Dr. Ellis looked away, his hands trembling. Time travel isn't like in the movies. It's not a machine you step into and come out the other side. It's a process that tears at the very fabric of reality. The human mind isn't built to handle it. The woman you found, her condition, her unconscious state, it's likely a side effect of the journey. And the baby might be the key to everything. The key to what? The millionaire pressed. To preventing a catastrophe, Dr. Ellis said, his voice low and urgent. If they've come back, it's because something terrible is going to happen. Something that could change the course of history. And they need your help to stop it. The millionaire felt a chill run down his spine. My help? Why me? Because you found them, Dr. Ellis said simply. Because you're the one who stopped to help when no one else would. That's not a coincidence. That's fate. The millionaire sat back, his mind reeling. He had come here looking for answers, but now he was faced with a responsibility he hadn't asked for. What do I need to do? Dr. Ellis leaned forward, his eyes intense. First, you need to protect them. There are people, powerful people, who would do anything to get their hands on that baby. If they find out about it, they'll stop at nothing to take it. Who are these people? The millionaire asked. Former members of the project, Dr. Ellis said. Scientists, government agents, mercenaries, people who believe the ends justify the means. They'll see the baby as a tool, not a person. And they'll use it to further their own agendas, no matter the cost. The millionaire's jaw tightened. I won't let that happen. Dr. Ellis nodded. Good. But you need to be careful. They're already looking for you. They'll have tracked the woman's energy signature when she arrived. It's only a matter of time before they find her. The millionaire stood up, his resolve hardening. Then I need to get back to the hospital. I'll take them somewhere safe. Dr. Ellis reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small, worn notebook. Take this. It contains everything I know about Project Horizon, codes, locations, and protocols. It might help you stay one step ahead of them. The millionaire took the notebook, his fingers brushing against the faded cover. Thank you, he said. But why are you helping me? Why now? Dr. Ellis sighed, his shoulders slumping. Because I made a mistake. I thought we were doing something noble, something that would change the world for the better. But I was wrong. And now I have a chance to make things right. The millionaire nodded, tucking the notebook into his coat. I'll do everything I can. As he turned to leave, Dr. Ellis called out to him. One more thing. The woman, if she wakes up, listen to her. She knows more than she's letting on. And whatever you do, don't let them take the baby. The millionaire gave a final nod and stepped out into the cool evening air. His mind was racing as he got into his car and started the engine. He needed to get back to the hospital as quickly as possible. But as he drove, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He glanced in the rearview mirror, his heart skipping a beat when he saw a black SUV following him at a distance. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel and pressed down on the accelerator, weaving through the narrow country roads. The SUV stayed close, its headlights glaring in the mirror. The millionaire's mind raced. Were these the people Dr. Ellis had warned him about? How had they found him so quickly? He took a sharp turn onto a dirt road, hoping to lose them, but the SUV followed without hesitation. His heart pounded as he realized he was running out of options. He couldn't lead them back to the hospital. He had to find another way. Up ahead, he saw a narrow bridge over a rushing river. Without thinking, he slammed on the brakes and skidded to a stop just before the bridge. He jumped out of the car and ran toward the riverbank, the sound of the SUV's engine growing louder behind him. As he reached the edge of the water, he turned and saw the SUV screech to a halt. Two men in dark suits stepped out, their faces grim and determined. The millionaire knew he was out of time. He took a deep breath and plunged into the icy water, the current pulling him downstream. The last thing he heard before the water closed over his head was the sound of the men shouting after him. The icy water pulled the millionaire downstream, the current dragging him under the surface. He fought to stay afloat, gasping for air as the cold seeped into his bones. Behind him, he could hear the men shouting, their voices growing fainter as the river carried him away. He struggled to the riverbank, his clothes heavy and soaked. His body shivered uncontrollably, but he forced himself to keep moving. He couldn't stop now. He had to get back to the hospital. The woman and the baby were counting on him. He stumbled through the woods, his mind racing. The black SUV and the men in dark suits, they were real. Dr. Ellis had been right. Someone was after the baby, and they were willing to do whatever it took to get it. The millionaire reached a small road and flagged down a passing car. The driver, an elderly man, took one look at his drenched and disheveled state and hesitated. "I need to get to the city," the millionaire said, his voice urgent. "Please. It's a matter of life and death." The man nodded reluctantly and let him in. As they drove, the millionaire pulled out his phone, relieved to find it still working despite the water. He called his assistant, his voice low and hurried. "I need you to get the woman and the baby out of the hospital. Now. Take them to the safe house. And be careful, we're being watched." His assistant didn't ask questions. "Understood. I'll handle it." The millionaire hung up and leaned back in his seat, his heart still pounding. He glanced out the window, scanning the road for any sign of the black SUV. So far, they were alone. When they reached the city, the millionaire thanked the driver and hurried to a nearby parking garage where he kept a second car, a nondescript sedan that wouldn't draw attention. He changed into dry clothes he kept in the trunk and drove to the safe house, a secluded property on the outskirts of the city. When he arrived, his assistant was already there, along with the woman and the baby. The woman was still unconscious, lying on a bed in one of the rooms. The baby was in a crib nearby, sleeping peacefully. "What's going on?" his assistant asked, her face pale with worry. "I'll explain later," the millionaire said. "For now, we need to stay hidden. No one knows about this place, right?" "No one," his assistant confirmed. "But, what are we dealing with?" The millionaire hesitated. "People who will stop at nothing to get what they want. And they want the baby." His assistant nodded, her expression serious. "I'll keep watch." The millionaire sat down beside the woman's bed, his mind racing. He opened the notebook Dr. Ellis had given him and began to read. The pages were filled with diagrams, equations, and notes, most of it beyond his understanding. But one section stood out, a list of names and locations, all connected to Project Horizon. One name in particular caught his eye, Dr. Catherine Reed. According to the notes, she had been one of the lead scientists on the project. If anyone could help him understand what was happening, it was her. He pulled out his phone and began searching for her. It didn't take long to find an address, a small town a few hours away. He knew he couldn't leave the woman and baby alone, but he also couldn't ignore this lead. He needed answers, and Dr. Reed might be the only one who could provide them. Just as he was about to call his assistant to arrange for extra security, the woman stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked around the room, her gaze landing on the millionaire. Where am I?" she whispered, her voice weak. "You're safe," the millionaire said, leaning closer. But we need to talk. Who are you? And why are those men after you? The woman's eyes filled with tears. They're not after me, she said. They're after the baby. He's the key. The key to what? The millionaire asked, his voice urgent. To stopping the end of the world, she said, her voice breaking. But they don't understand. They think they can control him, but they can't. If they get him, everything will be lost. The millionaire's heart raced. Who are they? The ones who continued the project, she said. They think they can use the baby to change the past, to create a future where they have all the power. But they're wrong. The baby, he's not what they think he is. Before the millionaire could ask more, the woman's eyes closed, and she fell unconscious again. He sat back, his mind reeling. The baby was the key to stopping a catastrophe, but in the wrong hands, he could be used to create something even worse. The millionaire knew what he had to do. He had to find Dr. Reed and learn the truth about Project Horizon. But he also had to protect the woman and the baby at all costs. He called his assistant into the room. I need to leave for a few hours, he said. Stay here with them. If anything happens, call me immediately. His assistant nodded. Be careful. The millionaire grabbed his coat and headed for the door, his resolve stronger than ever. He didn't know what he was walking into, but he knew one thing: he couldn't let the baby fall into the wrong hands. The future depended on it. The millionaire drove through the night, his mind racing with thoughts of the woman's words. The baby was the key to stopping the end of the world, but in the wrong hands, he could be used to create something far worse. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders as he navigated the dark, winding roads to the small town where Dr. Catherine Reed lived. When he arrived, the town was quiet, the streets empty except for the occasional flicker of a porch light. He found the address, a modest house at the end of a tree-lined street, and parked a short distance away. He approached cautiously, scanning the area for any signs of danger. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding. After a moment, it opened, revealing a woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes. She looked at him warily. Can I help you? Dr. Reed? He asked. Her expression tightened. Who's asking? My name isn't important, he said. But I need your help. I found a woman and a baby with a symbol, a circle with intricate patterns. I was told you might know what it means. Dr. Reed's face paled. She glanced over her shoulder, then stepped aside. You'd better come in. The millionaire followed her into a small, cluttered living room. Books and papers were stacked everywhere, and a large whiteboard covered one wall, filled with equations and diagrams. Dr. Reed motioned for him to sit, but he remained standing. What do you know about Project Horizon? He asked. Dr. Reed sighed, her shoulders slumping. More than I'd like to. I was one of the lead scientists. We were trying to unlock the secrets of human consciousness and explore the possibility of time travel. But the project was shut down after an incident. What kind of incident? The millionaire asked. Dr. Reed hesitated, her eyes distant. We succeeded. We found a way to send a human mind through time. But the process was unstable. The first test subject didn't survive. The government shut us down, and all records were destroyed. But it seems someone has continued the work. The woman I found, the millionaire said, she's connected to the project, isn't she? Dr. Reed nodded. If she has the symbol, she was part of an experiment. And if she's from the future, it means they found a way to stabilize the process. But at what cost? She said the baby is the key, the millionaire said. What does that mean? Dr. Reed's expression grew grave. The baby isn't just a child. He's a prototype, a genetically engineered being designed to withstand the effects of time travel. His DNA contains a unique marker that allows him to exist outside the normal flow of time. In the right hands, he could be used to prevent a catastrophe. But in the wrong hands, he could be used to change the past, the millionaire finished, his voice heavy with understanding. Exactly, Dr. Reed said. And if someone alters the past, the consequences could be catastrophic. The future, our future, could be erased. The millionaire's mind raced. The woman said the people after the baby want to use him to create a future where they have all the power. Who are they? Former members of the project, Dr. Reed said. Scientists, government agents, mercenaries, people who believe they can control time itself. They'll stop at nothing to get the baby. How do I stop them? The millionaire asked. Dr. Reed stood and walked to the whiteboard, pointing to a series of equations. The baby's DNA contains a fail-safe, a sequence that can deactivate his unique abilities. If you can access it, you can prevent anyone from using him to alter time. But it won't be easy. The sequence is encoded, and only someone with the right knowledge can unlock it. Can you help me? The millionaire asked. Dr. Reed hesitated, then nodded. I'll do what I can. But we need to act quickly. If they find the baby before we do, it will be too late. The millionaire pulled out the notebook Dr. Ellis had given him and handed it to her. This might help. Dr. Reed flipped through the pages, her eyes widening. This is incredible. It contains everything we need to access the failsafe. But we'll need to get to a secure facility, one with the right equipment. Where? The millionaire asked. There's an old research lab about an hour from here, Dr. Reed said. It was used for Project Horizon before it was abandoned. If we can get there, we might be able to activate the failsafe. The millionaire nodded. Let's go. As they stepped outside, a sudden noise made them freeze. The sound of an engine echoed through the quiet street, and a black SUV turned the corner, its headlights glaring. They've found us, Dr. Reed whispered, her voice trembling. The millionaire grabbed her arm and pulled her back inside. We need to leave. Now. They hurried through the house to the back door, the sound of car doors slamming outside spurring them on. They ran through the backyard and into the woods, the darkness swallowing them as they disappeared into the trees. Behind them, they heard shouts and the sound of footsteps crashing through the underbrush. The pursuers were close, and they were relentless. The millionaire's heart pounded as he led Dr. Reed through the woods, his mind focused on one thing, getting to the research lab and activating the failsafe. The future depended on it. The millionaire and Dr. Reed ran through the dense woods, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Behind them, the sound of their pursuers grew louder, shouts, footsteps, and the occasional crack of a branch underfoot. The darkness of the forest made it difficult to see, but the millionaire pushed forward, guided by instinct and urgency. How much farther? He asked, his voice low and urgent. Not far, Dr. Reed replied, her voice strained. The lab is just beyond these woods. But we need to lose them first. The millionaire glanced over his shoulder, catching glimpses of flashlights cutting through the trees. They were gaining ground. He tightened his grip on Dr. Reed's arm and veered off the path, leading her deeper into the underbrush. They moved as quietly as they could, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of leaves on the forest floor. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged from the woods onto a narrow dirt road. Ahead, the silhouette of an old, abandoned building loomed against the night sky. The research lab. There, Dr. Reed said, pointing. We need to get inside. They sprinted toward the building, their footsteps crunching on the gravel road. The lab was a stark, industrial structure, its windows boarded up and its walls covered in graffiti. It looked like it hadn't been used in years, but the millionaire knew better. This place held the key to saving the future. They reached the door, and Dr. Reed pulled out a set of keys from her pocket. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with the lock. "Hurry," the millionaire urged, glancing back toward the woods. The flashlights were getting closer. Finally, the lock clicked, and they slipped inside, closing the door behind them. The interior of the lab was dark and musty, filled with the scent of dust and decay. Dr. Reed flipped a switch, and a few dim lights flickered to life, casting long shadows across the room. "This way," she said, leading him down a narrow hallway. They passed rows of empty offices and storage rooms before reaching a heavy metal door at the end of the hall. Dr. Reed entered a code on the keypad, and the door hissed open, revealing a high-tech laboratory. The contrast was startling. While the rest of the building was in ruins, this room was pristine, filled with advanced equipment and computer terminals. Dr. Reed moved quickly, powering up the systems and pulling up a series of files on one of the monitors. "This is it," she said, her voice tense. "The failsafe sequence is encoded in the baby's DNA. If we can access it, we can deactivate his unique abilities and prevent anyone from using him to alter time." The millionaire watched as she worked, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "How long will it take?" "Not long," she said. "But we need to be careful. If we make a mistake, we could trigger a catastrophic reaction." As she worked, the millionaire kept an eye on the door, his ears straining for any sound of their pursuers. He didn't have to wait long. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, followed by the sharp crack of the metal door being forced open. "They're here," he said, his voice low. Dr. Reed didn't look up. "I need a few more minutes." The millionaire grabbed a metal pipe from a nearby table and moved to the door, his heart pounding. He could see shadows moving in the hallway, hear the low murmur of voices. They were outnumbered, but he couldn't let them reach the lab. The first man appeared in the doorway, his gun raised. The millionaire swung the pipe, knocking the weapon from his hand. The man stumbled back, but two more took his place, their faces grim and determined. The millionaire fought with everything he had, using the pipe to keep them at bay. But he was outmatched. One of the men landed a blow to his side, sending him crashing to the floor. He struggled to get up, but a boot pressed down on his chest, pinning him in place. "Where's the baby?" the man demanded, his voice cold. The millionaire didn't answer. He glanced toward Dr. Reed, who was still working frantically at the computer. She was so close. They couldn't give up now. Suddenly, the room was filled with a blinding light. The men shielding their eyes stumbled back. The millionaire seized the opportunity, pushing himself to his feet and grabbing the pipe. He swung it with all his strength, knocking one of the men to the ground. "It's done!" Dr. Reed shouted. "The fail-safe is activated." The millionaire turned to her, relief flooding through him. But before he could say anything, a gunshot rang out. Dr. Reed gasped, her hand flying to her side as she collapsed to the floor. "No!" the millionaire shouted, rushing to her side. He knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he tried to stop the bleeding. "It's too late for me," Dr. Reed whispered, her voice weak. "But you need to get out of here. Take the baby, and protect him. The future depends on it." The millionaire's eyes filled with tears as he nodded. "I will. I promise." Dr. Reed's hand fell limp, and her eyes closed. The millionaire stood, his grief turning to rage. He turned to face the men, his grip tightening on the pipe. But before he could move, the room was filled with a deafening roar. The equipment sparked and hissed, and the lights flickered wildly. The fail-safe had been activated, and the lab was collapsing. The lab was in chaos. Sparks flew from the overloaded equipment, and the air was thick with smoke. The millionaire crouched beside Dr. Reed's lifeless body, his heart heavy with grief and guilt. But there was no time to mourn. The fail-safe had been activated, and the lab was collapsing around him. He grabbed the notebook Dr. Reed had been using and stuffed it into his coat. Then he turned to face the men who had stormed the lab. They were disoriented, their weapons lowered as they tried to make sense of the chaos. The millionaire saw his chance. He swung the metal pipe with all his strength, knocking one of the men to the ground. The others turned to face him, but the millionaire was already moving. He darted past them, heading for the door. Behind him, he heard shouts and the sound of footsteps giving chase. The hallway was filled with smoke, making it difficult to see. The millionaire stumbled forward, his lungs burning as he fought to breathe. He reached the exit and burst outside, the cool night air a relief after the suffocating heat of the lab. But he wasn't safe yet. The men were still behind him, their shouts growing louder. He ran toward the woods, his legs aching with every step. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he had to get as far away from the lab as possible. As he ran, his mind raced. The fail-safe had been activated, but what did that mean for the baby? Would it be enough to protect him? And what about the woman back at the safe house? She had trusted him to keep the baby safe, and he couldn't let her down. The sound of an engine roared behind him, and he glanced over his shoulder to see a black SUV speeding down the dirt road. He veered off the path, plunging into the woods. The trees provided cover, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. They would find him eventually. He needed a plan. He needed help. He pulled out his phone and dialed his assistant's number. She answered on the first ring. "Where are you? Are you okay?" "I'm in trouble," he said, his voice strained. "I need you to get the woman and the baby out of the safe house. Take them somewhere no one will find them. And call the authorities. Tell them everything." "Understood," his assistant said, her voice steady. "But what about you?" "I'll be fine," he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "Just keep them safe." He hung up and kept running, his legs burning with exhaustion. The sound of the SUV grew louder, and he knew he was running out of time. He needed to find a way to lose them, but the woods were thick, and the darkness made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Suddenly, he tripped over a root and fell to the ground, the impact knocking the wind out of him. He struggled to his feet, but it was too late. The SUV screeched to a halt nearby, and the men jumped out, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The millionaire backed away, his hands raised. "It's over," he said, his voice calm despite the fear coursing through him. "The fail-safe has been activated. You can't use the baby anymore." One of the men stepped forward, his face twisted in anger. "You don't understand what's at stake. That baby is the key to everything. And we're not going to let you take that away from us." The millionaire's mind raced. He needed to buy time. "What do you want?" he asked. "Power? Control? You think you can change the past, but you'll only make things worse." The man sneered. "We'll take that risk." Before the millionaire could respond, a loud crash echoed through the woods. The men turned, their flashlights scanning the trees. The millionaire saw his chance. He lunged forward, tackling the nearest man to the ground. They struggled, rolling in the dirt, until the millionaire managed to grab the man's gun. He fired a shot into the air, the sound echoing through the woods. The other men froze, their eyes wide with fear. "Back off," the millionaire shouted, his voice firm. "Or I'll shoot." The men hesitated, then slowly raised their hands. The millionaire kept the gun trained on them as he backed away, his heart pounding. He didn't know how long he could keep them at bay, but he had to try. Just then, the sound of sirens filled the air. The millionaire's assistant had come through. The men exchanged panicked glances, then turned and ran, disappearing into the woods. The millionaire sank to his knees, his body trembling with exhaustion. He had done it. He had protected the baby. But the cost had been high. As the police arrived and began to secure the area, the millionaire thought about Dr. Reed and her sacrifice. She had given her life to protect the future, and he would honor her memory by ensuring the baby was safe. But he knew this wasn't over. The men who had pursued him were still out there, and they wouldn't stop until they had the baby. The millionaire had to be ready. The future depended on it. The police escorted the millionaire back to the safe house, where his assistant was waiting with the woman and the baby. The woman was awake now, her eyes filled with worry as she held the baby close. When she saw the millionaire, her face lit up with relief. "You're safe," she said, her voice trembling. "And the baby?" "The baby is safe," the millionaire assured her. "The fail-safe has been activated. No one can use him to alter time anymore." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "You've done more than you know." The millionaire sat down beside her, his body aching with exhaustion. "Who are you?" he asked gently. "And why did you come back?" The woman hesitated, then nodded. "My name isn't important. What matters is why I'm here. In the future, the world is on the brink of collapse. Wars, famine, environmental disasters, it's too much. The baby, he was created as a last hope. A way to prevent the catastrophe before it happens. But there are those who want to use him for their own gain. They think they can control time, but they don't understand the consequences." The millionaire listened in silence, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," the woman said, "we protect him. We make sure he grows up in a world where he can fulfill his purpose, not as a tool, but as a symbol of hope. A reminder that even in the darkest times, there are people who will do the right thing." The millionaire nodded, his resolve strengthening. "I'll make sure of it. He'll have a chance to live a normal life, surrounded by people who care about him." The woman smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you. You've given us a future." Over the next few days, the millionaire worked with the authorities to ensure the baby's safety. The men who had pursued them were arrested, and the secrets of Project Horizon were buried once and for all. The baby was placed with a loving family, far from the dangers of his past. As for the woman, she chose to stay in the present, determined to help rebuild the world she had left behind. She and the millionaire became close friends, united by their shared mission to protect the future. One evening, as the sun set over the city, the millionaire stood on the balcony of his penthouse, looking out at the skyline. His assistant joined him, handing him a cup of coffee. "You did it," she said. "You saved the future." The millionaire shook his head. "I didn't do it alone. Dr. Reed, the woman, we all played a part. And the baby, he's the real hero. He's the one who will change the world." His assistant smiled. "Maybe. But it all started with you. You could have driven past that woman on the street. But you didn't. You stopped. And because of that, the world has a chance." The millionaire thought about her words, a sense of peace settling over him. He had started this journey as a wealthy businessman, focused on success and power. But now, he understood what truly mattered: kindness, compassion, and the courage to do what was right, no matter the cost. As he looked out at the city, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The future was uncertain, but it was also full of possibility. And he knew that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them with hope and determination.